This is Bloomberg West. I'm Emily Chang. We pick up now with more highlights from Mary Meeker's annual Internet Trends Report, perhaps the most influential breakdown of themes to watch in the tech industry every year. Earlier this week, we focused on the rise of visual-driven apps like OfferUp, shaping how users choose to spend time on their phones. Meeker also spent a significant amount of her report on car technology, specifically how cars are becoming more computer than engine on wheels, and how that change might actually make us more productive as a society. Joining us now to discuss, Virginia Heffernan, author of Magic and Lost, The Internet as Art, and John Hagel, who's written about car tech as co-chair of Deloitte's Center for the Edge. Thank you guys so much for joining us. So, John, I'll start with you. What did you make of Meeker's assessment of how connected cars will evolve to become something much more like a computer that could potentially make us more productive?
Yeah, no, I think she hit on two key trends in the automotive industry or the mobility ecosystem. One is this notion of moving to autonomous cars, which is compute intensive. It requires computers and software. The other is this notion of moving from ownership to access and sharing. And that also is internet and computer enabled. Without the ability to locate a car quickly, you're not going to give up your car and share it. And the interesting thing is what happens when these two come together, and how does the industry look at that point?
Virginia, you write about the digitization of life, and I think the idea of an autonomous car still scares a lot of people. When are we going to be ready to accept this idea?
I mean, it's a great idea, and in some ways it's anyone's guess. I mean, the driverless cars, there's something, I mean, it's not quite to the level of cloning or Mars where people feel the squeamishness that they feel about some new developments, but autonomous cars, driverless cars, bring up a lot of emotional feelings that Americans in particular have about driving. You know, I read this really great account the other day by a writer in Medium about how she just lost interest in driving at somewhere between losing the standard shift, traffic, the boring highways. Driving just didn't feel like driving anymore. It wasn't that physical experience where you would sort of almost perform the landscape, you know, connect yourself to the machine. You know, and we're increasingly getting removed from that. I think the Meeker report said that millennials expect cars to become more like computers than cars, expect to have that kind of Wi-Fi in cars. But, you know, we said the same thing about homes, and now there's pushback on companies like Nest that have tried to completely digitize the home. So who knows?
John, how do autonomous cars and self-driving, autonomous cars and shared cars like Uber and Lyft, how do they come together?
Well, I think it's interesting. We're going to see multiple ways of this evolving, but our sense is, we've done a work on the future of mobility, our sense is the first stage is going to be more around moving to access versus ownership, and it's particularly going to be driven by urban millennials at the start who really don't have that much interest in owning a car. Once you get to accessing cars versus owning them, now you've got somebody else driving anyway. So what's the difference between trusting a driver versus trusting a computer to actually drive the car for you? And so I think over time we'll see the convergence and very different kinds of fleet mobility operators. Uber today is very asset light because they just hire drivers who have their own cars. What happens when the drivers disappear?
It's a very interesting question, Virginia. I mean, you can imagine sitting in the back of a self-driving Lyft or self-driving Uber. First of all, those drivers are now out of a job. Second of all, you know, we have that time to essentially be productive. How does that impact our productivity? And I guess, where do you draw the line?
Yeah, I mean, if driving is no longer, you know, a place where you feel a great deal of agency, I mean, it has been interesting to see both how, you know, sharing cars and Uber has mirrored something like the music business, where you no longer want to download songs, you want to stream them. Same with television shows and DVDs. So you don't want to own a car that you have to park and that feels like a burden and that you have to pay off. You want to sort of stream your ride in the internet. At the same time, there's a little bit of an infantilization that happens. I mean, you know, everybody's private driver Uber's original tagline really said that, you're either a kid getting driven around all the time or a celebrity, who gets to sit in the back of the car and in theory, do a lot of work, but in practice, maybe just, play games on your phone or whatever. So I'm not sure that it makes us better workers, but it definitely makes us feel more cosseted and taken care of. I still get a thrill in an Uber and, still think I'm a big shot when that car comes.
John, Mary Meeker talked about the potential for a second golden age for Detroit and U.S. automakers to make a comeback with computerized cars. What do you think the likelihood is of that happening?
Well, I think there's the potential for a new golden age. The question is, who's going to get the gold there? Because, yes, Detroit could capture the gold. There are a whole bunch of startups here in Silicon Valley that are targeting that opportunity. And by the way, what happens, let's imagine over time we get to these fleet mobility operators like Uber, highly concentrated. Now you're an automobile manufacturer. You used to sell to unsophisticated consumers and got a pretty good deal. Now you're going to face an extremely sophisticated, large company that has a lot of negotiating power.
It's fascinating to contemplate the future. John Hagel, co-chairman of Deloitte's Center for the Edge, thank you so much for joining us.